इसको थोड़ा सा ऊपर करना है हल्का ताकि आम मुखर ठीक है आपके हिसाब से आपके हिसाब से एडजस्ट करूंगा मेरी साइकोलॉजी की Good morning, learners and viewers. Welcome to the session for business communication, that is MMPC007. And today we will be discussing about block 1, which consists of 3 units. That is basics of communication, process of communication, and types of communication. We will start with basics of communication. What is communication? Communication is one of the most discussed essential skills of one. It is very important to understand the nonsense of communication. Communication is important in an organization. Why? Working in a business enterprise, we interact with superiors, co-workers, and subordinates, converse one-on-one, or over the intercom, or phone, and read and write emails, letters, business reports, and proposals. All these activities have one thing in common, that is the sharing of information. No business enterprise or organization can function without communication. Communication is at the center of all business activities. The better our communication skills, the greater our chances of success are. How this communication started, and what we can say that what is the evolution of communication. Communication is a way to interact with others. It is an integral part of our lives. A proper communication results in proper understanding. Communication techniques have evolved over the years and say ages and are a continuous process. Communication is a process which involves exchange of interaction or relaying an expression with the help of words or signs. It is very important to communicate effectively so as to convey the message clearly. There are different types of communication. For example, we can say that verbal and non-verbal, these are the basic configuration. We know that how the communication started and now what is the present form. Way back, if we go to the history, started from cave paintings, one of the oldest method of communication. Cave paintings are just not paintings. Instead, they conveyed a specific message like making the territories, recording major events, etc. Now, how this, after the passage of time, communication started through symbols. Smoke signals. In early ages, people depended on the elements to communicate. Smoke signals were one of the forms to transmit a message. Carrier pigeons. We all know something or we have heard. This was one of the popular method of sending the written messages through the pigeons who became the carrier to the message. Postal system. During ancient times, Egyptians used the courier services to send the official order decrees. India, China, Rome, and Persia too had an organized postal system. The first mailbox system and delivery of paid envelopes started way back in 1653. Then come print. First printing press was developed by the Germans in 1440 and it brought a radical change in the communication process. In the 16th century, newspaper came into existence. Then after print, it came to radio. After the print communication technique took a new turn and wireless power evolved as one of the forms to transmit messages. Radio broadcasting started in 1893. After that, telegraph communication was a revolution in long distance communication. Morse code was developed by Samuel Morse, which was a series of clicks, tones, and lights to transmit the message. And the first telegraph message was sent in 1844. Then came telephone. The invention of telephone became a major form of verbal communication and till date it is the most reliable form of communication. Then television started. It is also an integral part of our lives. Television is a mode of indirect communication. Internet. In 1950, we saw the emergence of computers, which now has become the major source of communication. This saw the technology penetration considerably in the communication process. In 1973, we saw the emergence of term internet, which is now is the most used form. After internet, email came. Email is an electronic mail and now has become an integral form of communication in the personal as well as professional lives. Text messages, we have been using it on mobiles. It is another form or another mode of communication which is short and fast and uses a data network. And the latest, rather we can say, the latest mode of communication is social media, which has digitized the world. The use of social media platform has brought the world closer. During the pandemic, this has been one of the most popular mode to transmit messages. Now, what are the elements of communication? First of all, we will define communication. Communication, as the word has been derived from the Latin word communicatius, which means to share. To define communication, it can be said that it is an act of purposefully and actively exchanging information between two or more peoples to send or receive a message through a shared system of signs and symbols. What are the basic elements of communication? Source, message, channels, receivers, environment, context, and interface. What is the difference between general and business communication? You can see there are some categories. For example, we can say that format, category, extent or reach, demonstration, aim, kind, nature or pattern, and the feedback. As far as business communication is concerned, well, it has a specific format for communication. It is formal in nature. It is usually practical and unbiased. It specifically follows norms and procedures of the organization. And it also focuses on the aim of the organization. No doubt it is official in nature and it requires a feedback. On the other hand, general communication doesn't follow any specific format. It involves personal touch. It can be warm and it can be fictitious and biased at times. It is informal and different method can be used as per the choice. It does not have a focus and it has personal nature in touch. And as far as the feedback is concerned, it's not compulsory or important. What is the purpose of business communication? Business communication plays a key role in a business enterprise or industry. All managerial and administrative activities involve communication, be it planning, organizing, recruiting, coordinating, or decision making. Communications serve as a means to measure the success of growth of an organization. Participation in the communication process involves developing skills in collecting and organizing information, analyzing and evaluating facts, appreciating the difference between facts and inferences, and communicating effectively. Communication is successful only when the purpose is fulfilled. The purpose of communication in, may be to inform, persuade, or to motivate a desired action. Therefore, the measure of communication effectiveness depends on the extent to which the final goal is achieved. We should use a proper language. On the very basic dimensions of effective communication is the knowledge and use of proper language for a specific purpose. Just as communication is always purposive, language is also purposive. Therefore, we have to study the relation between language and the purpose of its use. The purpose can be to inform, to persuade, to create, or to argue. One can use language by combining some of these purpose ones and can inform as well as persuade. The effectiveness of communication depends upon the kind of personality that communicates. When a communicator chooses certain words and organizations of words and not others, he or she projects a personality with a particular center of concern and the relation to the person he is addressing. Such self dramatization in language is known as style. The speaker or writer, according to his personality, chooses his style of verbal and non-verbal communication to purposefully establish a particular center of interest and relationship with his or her audience. Now, we move on to 7 C's of communication. In the business world, effective communication is the key to success. And effective communication is applicable to both oral as well as written communication. It is therefore very important to understand 7 C's of communication, which helps in conveying important messages effectively, in turn increasing employees' engagement and productivity. Now, what are these 7 C's? Are clarity, correctness, conciseness, courtesy, concreteness, consideration, and completeness. So we'll see what actually these words basically mean. Clarity means that a specific message has been sent instead of trying to send too many messages at a particular time. This involves use of simple and precise services. The following are the features of clarity: clear understanding, clarity of thoughts and ideas, use of simple, appropriate, and precise words. Second one is correctness. Use of correct language, grammar, data, etc. is very important to communicate the message clearly. The features of correctness are timely, exact, and correct message, confidence booster, greater impact on the audience. Third one is conciseness. This means communicating using minimum but appropriate words. It has the following features: time saving, avoid excessive usage of unnecessary words, short and limited, appealing and comprehensible, and non repeatable. Fourth one, courtesy. This is one of the most important C's of communication as it shows the respect, politeness, judicial behavior with the other party in turn creating goodwill. It has the following features: consideration of the feeling of the audience, positive and focused, and it is unbiased. Fifth one is concreteness. As the term suggests, it is specific, meaningful, and clear and avoids ambiguity and double meaning. Following are its features: support facts and figures, clear and precise, avoid misinterpretation. The sixth one is consideration. This implies that the audience is taken into consideration in terms of his or her viewpoints, culture, mindset, values, etc. And it has the features: it stresses on you approach, empathetic, optimistic. And the seventh one is completeness. The last C of communication is completeness. As the term suggests, it means that any communication, be it personal or professional, should be complete. It should deliver all the facts and information required to send the message to the receiver. It has the following features: builds reputation of the organization, cost saving, removes the barrier of vague information, and helps in better decision making. From seven C's of communication, it is quite clear that communication is one of the most initial skills that should be practiced. Now, we move on to Unit 2, that is, what are the processes of communication. As we know that communication is one of the most integral part of an individual or an organization. There is a specific way to communicate effectively. Therefore, it is important for us to understand the process of human communication so as to avoid the common errors which take place in communication. We start with linear concept of communication. The following five fundamental questions are asked in early stages of communication: who says, what is said, where it is said, to whom it is said, and with what effect it is said. The transmission of information from sender to a recipient is considered to be a one-way process of communication. The receiver passively receives the message and acts as directed or requested by the sender, according to the linear perspective. The goal of communication is to manipulate or control the receiver. It is assumed that the message reaches the receiver intact and unchanged as it travels through the medium chosen by the sender. We can see from the basic example that the sender has sent the message through the media, that it is being transmitted to the receiver, and then the action is taken. So it is moving in one direction. That means we can say that it is a linear view. Then Shannon-Weaver model of communication was proposed. The concept is predicated on the notion that communication takes place only after the message has been received, and that it should be received as intact as possible. Of course, this is a theoretical notion of perfect communication. In real life, Filters in both the sender's and receiver's mind influence the meaning of the message. Feedback to some extent corrects any distortion and trends to complete the communications cycle. We can see that what is the model of communication channel is. Information source is there, message is being transmitted, it can be through computer, it is compressed, moved from through a medium, it is received by the receiver, and then it is transformed to the destination to which it has to move. In between, we can see that below the channel there is noise source. That means alteration is there. The Shannon-Weaver model did not consider feedback to be an essential component since it saw communication as a linear process with feedback as a separate act of communication. Therefore, in Shannon-Weaver model, a dotted line is used to represent feedback. Source of information, that is ideation. Information source is the first step in the communication process. The sender has some unproposed data. His or her goal is to turn the data into a message that can be shared. The information source of the communication process is the source of the message. Here we can see what is the process of communication is. We can see there are 6 stages and they are moving in one direction. That is the source which creates the message, selects the channel, sends the message, receiver gets the message, filters it according to his experience, knowledge, feelings, and then it is moved to the 6th stage, that is the interpretation stage. And then in between, we can see that there are 2 phases. That is, first one is the feedback, and the second one below the second step is noise. Encoding, the sender composes the message after giving it some thoughts, verbal symbols, or any other symbolic form of expression. Encoding is the term for this procedure. Then comes channel of transmission, that means how the message is moving. A channel is a suitable medium for sending a message. So it can be orally, in written, electronically, in coded language, or through a signaling system. Decoding, this involves receiving, comprehending, and interpreting the message. This is how a recipient receives the message. Once the message is received, then acting starts. The communication process comes to a close when the receiver acts as on an interpreted message, just as the sender intended. We can observe that communication completes a full circle, bringing the sender and receiver together as 2 sides of the same coin. Modern master considers communication to be a vital ability for successful managers because of its uniting process in we used word noise. This mechanism is susceptible to noise, which can obstruct or distort communication, preventing the message from being sent from the transmitter to the receiver. Noise, according to certain communication theorists, refers to extrinsic disturbances in the physical environment around the act of communication, such as poor audio quality, phone dropouts, bad printouts, or unreadable writing. Filters are responsible for communicating distortion induced by subjective elements, such as the sender's and receiver's attitude. These are psychological in nature. Attitude, beliefs, experiences, self awareness, and the ability to think coherently are among them. Now, two-way communication process. Communication is now viewed as two-way process in later conceptualization of the process. The receiver also serves as the sender of feedback to the transmitter to complete the communication cycle. As in telemarketing or call center communication, both the sender and the recipient plays a reciprocal and reversible role. Here we can see that it is moving. The two-way approach is more modern. It views communication as primarily a reciprocal process involving the exchange of messages. Because the sender, source, and the receiver are often the same individual. There is no clear separation between the two positions. What are the barriers to communication? In any type of communication process, there are certain barriers which need to be understood so that they can be removed or avoided to make the communication process effective. A barrier works like a sieve, allowing just a portion of the message to get through, preventing the intended reaction. Communication obstacles arises even when we have the greatest of intentions and our written and spoken messages are misconstrued. These sort of obstacles can be categorized as interpersonal, intrapersonal, organizational. What are intrapersonal barriers? Because of the variance in views, experiences, education, culture, and personality, each individual is unique. As our thinking differs, we perceive the same information in various ways. These distinctions are due to inherent or intrapersonal obstacles. The common cause that lead to these intrapersonal barriers are wrong assumptions, varied perceptions, differing background, wrong inferences, block categories, and categorical thinking. Wrong assumptions. To strengthen your skills as a communicator, try to put yourself in the shoes of the listener. This exercise will prevent making wrong assumptions about the receiver. That means we have to think what we are saying and how, if we are listening to that, what will be our reaction. Varied perception. Individuals in an organization also perceive the same situation in different ways. It is all a matter of perception. The best way to overcome this barrier is to step back and take a wider, unbiased perspective of the issue. Differing background. It is important to understand the audience background in order to improve communication abilities. This information can accordingly be used to construct the message. The language understood by the receiver should be used to avoid ambiguity and reduce multiple meanings. Wrong inferences. Because inferences are more dramatic than facts, they might give more opportunities for gossips and rumor to spread. It is critical that inferences are be backed by facts when professionals evaluate materials, solve problems, and design processes. The use of terms like all, always, everybody, everything, every time, and their opposites like none, never, nobody, and nothing is a hint to recognizing this barrier in ourselves and others. If a message contains too many of these words, then there is a fair chance of communication getting distorted. To avoid this barrier, substitute these words with phrases like in most situations or most likely. The terms like it appears to be or the evidence shows to label your viewpoints. Then comes interpersonal barriers. These are caused by the individual's attitude or habits, whereas interpersonal barriers are caused by the limited communication abilities of either coder, decoder, or both. In a business environment, we neither attempt to change these traits, nor we can do it. However, we can try to understand how differences in individuals' traits causes communication gaps. The most common cause of interpersonal barriers are limited vocabulary, incompatibility of verbal and non-verbal messages, emotional outburst, communication selectivity, cultural variations, poor listening skills, and noise in the channel. Limited vocabulary. Inadequate vocabulary can be a big communication barrier. We occasionally find ourselves looking for the perfect word or phrases that best expresses what we want to say. If we fumble for words during a speech, it will leave a poor impression on the audience. On the other hand, having a large and broad vocabulary can help us make a good impression to our listeners. Incompatibility of verbal and non-verbal messages. Non-verbal cues provides a deeper insight into a sender's message. Ignoring or misinterpreting non-verbal cues might lead to the message being entirely misinterpreted. As a result, not only should one strive to read others' non-verbal cues, but one should also be mindful of one's own body language. One can follow certain guidelines to improve the physical appearance to give a strong impression. These are: dress appropriately for the event, keep your clothing tidy and clean, choose a suitable hairstyle, wear clean and polished shoes. What is emotional outburst? Emotions are an integral part of our day, whether in business or personal encounters. By sharpening self awareness, intention, and empathy, emotions can help in developing an environment that is highly conducive to good communications. Situations do arise when people react negatively, depending on their nature and the situation. This negative reaction may be classified as hostile or defensive. Those reactions occur when the receiver of the message perceives some kind of threat. It is important to maintain one's composure in all kinds of communication. Viewing issues from different perspectives helps develop objectivity and rational thinking, which in turn can eliminate many of the causes of hostility or defensiveness. Communication selectivity. Communication selectivity is a barrier imposed by the recipient in a communication process when he or she pays attention to only a portion of the message. This happens because he is or she is interested only in that part of the message which may be of use to him or her. In this case, the sender is not to blame. The receiver is the one who interrupts the flow of communication. Cultural variations. This is one of the most predominant interpersonal factors contributing to communication failure. As businesses are crossing national boundaries to compete on global scale, the outlook of the global and domestic workforce has changed drastically. European, Asians, and American firms have expanded their business worldwide to create international ties through partnership, collaborations, and affiliations. To compete successfully in such a business environment, one must overcome the communication inadequacy arising due to different languages and cultures. Poor listening skills. This is the habit that a frequent communication barrier. It is important to keep in mind that listening and hearing are not the same things. Hearing is a passive activity, whereas listening involves deliberate attention and correct decoding of the speaker's information. Misunderstandings and disputes can be avoided if individuals pay close attention to the message. Sometimes an individual is so engrossed in his or her thought and worries that he is unable to concentrate on listening. If a superior goes on shifting the papers on his or her desk while listening to his or her subordinate without making eye contact with the latter, he or she pays divided attention to the speaker's message. noise in the channel. Any undesirable signal that obstructs communication is referred to as noise. It is not restricted to oral disruption, but may also take the shape of visual, audiovisual, textual, bodily, or psychological manifestations. Each of these kinds of noise transmit additional information that might detract from the message and even upset the receiver. Organizational barriers. Communication obstacles exist not just between individuals or between two persons, but also inside organizations. Every company, regardless of the size, has its own communication strategies and must operate under its own communication environment. In a large organization where the flow of communication is downward, feedback is not guaranteed. Organizations with a flat structure usually tend to have an intricately knit communication network. The majority of large communication corporations are discovering that a rigid hierarchical structure restricts communication. This is due to the multiple transfer points in these hierarchical systems, communication flow, which can cause the message to be distorted, delayed, or lost. To avoid these, there should preferably be a sender-receiver contact, or the message should be transmitted with minimum transfer stations. The main organizational barriers are too many transfer stations, that means moving through different channels, fear of superiors, negative tendencies, use of inappropriate media, information overload. Too many transfer stations means there is more links in a communication chain. The greater are the chances of miscommunication. Imagine, for instance, that your professors ask you to convey a message to X. You, because of some inconvenience or sheer laziness, ask your friend Y to do this job. Now, there are four people involved in this communication channel. Let us see how the messages get distorted as a result of the increased number of transfer stations. Fear of superiors. Fear or awe of superiors hinders subordinates from speaking openly in strictly organized organizations. Some employees may avoid any conversation with their superiors in order to avoid speaking directly to their employees. At the other extreme, they may present all the information that they have, feeling that they may be censored for leaving out some information which may be vital in superior's eye. The perception is there. Negative tendencies. Many organizations create work groups. While some groups are formed according to the requirement of the task on hand, such as completing a particular work project, other small groups are also formed for recreational, social, or community purposes. These groups may be formal or informal and generally consist of people with similar values, beliefs, behaviors, attitudes, and opinions. Use of inappropriate media. While choosing the medium for a particular occasion, the advantages, disadvantages, and potential barriers to communication must be considered. While deciding the medium, such as phones, emails, computer presentations, teleconferencing, and video conferencing, the following factors should be considered. That is the time, type of message, cost, and intended audience. For example, the telephone is not a good medium for delivering sensitive information. Such communications are best delivered in persons or by private chat messages. If the receiver is in another office. For information that has to be recorded and retained in the future, printed letters are preferred since they are permanent. Effective communication usually requires a combination of mediums such as an email, followed by a phone conversation. Information overload. One of the most serious issues confronting businesses today is the loss of efficiency caused by manual processing or enormous amount of data. Information overload is the term for this situation. The usual result of information overload are fatigue, disinterest, or boredom. Under these circumstances, further communication is not possible. Important and essential information is frequently mixed in with too many irrelevant data and overlooked by the receiver. To reduce information overload in an organization, screening of information is must. Message should be directed only to those people who are likely to benefit from the information. Now, we move on to unit 3, that is type of communications. Robert Burton said that a blow with a word strikes deeper than a blow with sword. Therefore, it is important to choose our words judiciously, cautiously, as it determines the success of our communication at personal and professional levels. Our personal and professional words have move on the wheels of communication. A person with better communication skills achieves more success at personal and professional level as compared to a person who has average or below average level of these skills. Now we can see a simple figure. Communication can be verbal, non-verbal. If it is verbal, it can be further vocal, non-vocal. As far as non-verbal is concerned, that also is having two categories, that is vocal and non-vocal. If we talk about the verbal part, in vocal part means that spoken one, it is spoken by. And non-verbal, it can be in the form of written form. It can use sign language, finger spellings, brailles. And on the non-verbal side, if we talk about the vocal category, it is use of voice, that is crying, laughing, and on the non-vocal part, it can be facial expression, body languages, and spacings. Communication is essential in advising, counseling, guidance, mentoring, giving orders, delegation, giving warnings, preparing advertisement, and marketing, among others. A major part of our spoken words, that is oral communication, is supplemented by body language, gestures, signs, and expressions. And these are non-verbal components of the communication. Verbal communication is the sum total of the time spent in speaking, listening, and writing in a personal and professional capacity. We can understand verbal communication as the establishment of communication between people using oral or written words. The message is transferred from the sender to the receiver through an oral or written channel of communication. Verbal communication stands for both spoken and written communication. It can be one-way communication where the messages flow from the sender to the receiver and nothing goes back to the sender from the receiver. Or it can be a two-way communication when communication is negotiated between two people. That is, the sender sends the messages and the receiver responds. Types of verbal communication. It is, as it was shown in the figure, it is categorized in two forms, oral communication and written communication. Oral communication is the most common and popular mode of communication in our personal and professional lives. It can be formal, informal, one-way or two-way communication. It can involve a face-to-face interaction, telephonic conversation, or communication through video conferencing. In other words, it involves a speaker that is, who is sending the messages, and a listener. The speaker and the listener may establish a one-way or two-way communication depending upon the settings. Oral communication can be of two types, that is, formal or informal. Informal communication involves person speaking and listening to everyday occurrence while talking to friends, family members, or colleagues or topics not related to business or other formal situations. On the other hand, informal oral communication is mostly casual in nature and is based on social relationships between the people. It is unofficial in nature and normally occurs outside the hierarchy of the school, college, and businesses. Formal oral communication does not involve casual exchange of information and is governed by organizational hierarchies and chain of commands. The flow of information which follows is controlled by strict codes, bounded by time and structure, but in place by the master team. Formal oral communication is practiced religiously in certain situations like interviews, oral evaluations, that is YYYs, lectures, debates, speeches, presentations, group discussion in a business meeting or in a school. Formal oral communication is more reliable source. It is communicated in official capacity and in most cases can be traced back to its source. On the contrary, informal oral communication is not governed by such strict hierarchies and normally is not reliable since most of it is said in a casual settings. The information moves freely in formal settings opposed to formal settings, where the information moves through predefined channels. Written communication can be understood as the sending of messages through written words. In this mode of communication, the sender of the message uses written mode to transfer the message. The message is communicated through letters, manuals, reports, emails, handbooks, books, circulars, etc., as per the requirement. Written communication is very effective way of communication since it involves documentation that can be preserved or can become a permanent record for future use. It is primarily a formal mode of communication, and unlike oral communication, it is not very flexible in nature. A written document can be used as evidence in a legal scenario, and hence it is a reliable mode of communication in professional settings. The language used in this form of communication is usually formal in nature. In today's world of social media and multimedia messaging, we use written communication in our daily lives as well as in official communications in abundance. Social media messaging, SMS, and instant messaging, that is IM, has become an integral part of our lives. It is important to note that regardless of the type of the language used, the conversation or exchange of information in written form on these new mediums, platforms, or communications can be documented and preserved for future personal, professional, legal, and other uses. Written communication has its own merits and demerits. In its formal sphere, written communication moves very slowly as compared to oral communication. Electronic or paper form of written communication is destined to a waiting period and the receiver cannot access the message spontaneously as in the case of oral communication. Oral communication does not require a person to be literate to transfer the message. Human beings are born with the ability to acquire language, and we start speaking much earlier than we learn to write. Non-verbal communication, all form of communication do not require the use of words in oral or written form. In this form of communication, the speaker generally does not exchange words. However, the communication takes place through non-verbal cues. It is an essential part of the communicative process, and various experts have opined that it constitutes more than 50% of the communicative process. Non-verbal communication may be visual or auditory in nature. Symbols, signs, gestures, body language, facial expression, eye contact, physical appearance may be considered as visual non-verbal cues. Non-verbal communication governs a major aspect of our lives. We interact with signs and symbols on daily basis. These conversations are normally one-way communication. For example, the traffic light communicates with a very large group of commuters by guiding their movements for a swift flow of the traffic and controlling a probable situation of choice. Non-verbal communication is a form of universal communication which is not restricted to language boundaries, and the same sign and the symbols can be used everywhere. These signs and symbols act as a tool to include the illiterate population in all major activities. Take an example of a football or cricket match. These matches are attended by a large number of people, and it would be impossible to communicate with the audience and convey the match proceedings. A cricket umpire makes gestures through his or her hand to inform everyone if the player is out or has scored a boundary. A football referee uses color cards, flags, and other gestures to communicate with the audience. These gestures and symbols are fixed and universally accepted. What are the advantages and disadvantages of non-verbal communication? If we talk about the advantages, it is very useful for one-way communication when a person or a large group of people needs to understand a simple message quickly. It is important to, and rather it is easy to understand, and people almost act instinctively on specific signs, symbols, etc. Literacy of the language is not essential in comprehending nonverbal signs and symbols. What are the disadvantages? It can be only one-way process in most of the cases. The meaning of the message is fixed and the people need to learn the meaning of particular sign. Traffic signs interpreted incorrectly may result in an accident. Types of non-verbal communications. The categorization of non-verbal form of communication is very difficult since there are a number of things that come under non-verbal mode of communication. However, we can broadly categorize them. That is kinesis, that is body language, facial expressions, eye contact, sign language, proxemics and chronemics, that is space and time, paralanguage, meta communication, haptics, that is related to touch, and the silence. Kinesis can be understood as the study of body's physical movement for the purpose of communication. In other words, we can understand it as the way our body communicates without words and using various movements of hands, facial expressions, eye contact, etc. For example, nodding of head communicates an acceptance or denial by the receiver. Parameters to understand kinesis is a better way as these parameters play an important role in the business world. Number one, physical appearance. A well-dressed person with appropriate accessories on him or her is considered cultured and educated as compared to a person who dresses to fulfill essential needs or does not have a neat hairstyle. You can see different forms of kinesis postures. It can be understood as the way we present ourselves. It includes the way we stand, we talk, we walk, sit, and hold ourselves while we move around during the process of communication. It is a variable component of communication and varies according to the circumstances we face communicating our messages. It is a very important component since it speaks volumes about our personality. Gestures. The movement we make with our hands, heads, or face are termed as gestures. Too many or too little gestures may impede the effectiveness of the communication. Nodding our head is negation or acceptance on a viewpoint appropriately supplemented the verbal communication. But on the other hand, it may make it ineffective if used inappropriately. Facial expressions. Our facial expressions are an integral part of the communicative process since it expresses the intent of the speaker. We can understand the intentions of the speaker by looking at the facial expressions, and hence it becomes important for the sender of the message to supplement his or her words through appropriate facial expressions. Eye contact. Eye contact with the audience can change the effect of the message on the receiver. Our eye communicates in various ways. A good eye contact with the listener receiver of the message can make the conversation more powerful. On the other hand, avoiding eye contact may result in disinterested audience and portray the speaker as weak and non-confident. Maintaining eye contact reaffirms the audience about the keenness, confidence, and willingness of the speaker to establish communication with the listeners. However, looking down or looking away conveys that the speaker is shy, nervous, or disinterested in the process of communication. Sign languages. It is a highly developed system of non-verbal communication. It uses visual, audio-visual signs and symbols to communicate. We have already discussed that sign language is the most popular mode of non-verbal communication. There are universally accepted symbols and signs and are widely used in the world. However, there are culture-specific signs and symbols and can be understood differently by people from different cultures. A thumbs up is a positive sign and used primarily to show agreement or motivate people in Western society. However, it is a sign of negation in Indian subculture. Sign language can also be understood as communication through body languages, gestures, and facial expressions. It is used in place of speech, and in some cases, it is also used to supplement oral communication. In India, we use many signs which represents our culture. For example, the symbol of O, frequently used in India, is known as the sound of the universe. We can see another examples. The symbol V represents different meanings in different parts of the world. Now let us have a look at those meanings. USA, it represents a symbol of peace. Australia, New Zealand, Ireland, and UK, the symbol is considered to be a sign of rudeness and defiance. Proximus. Proximus studies deals with the necessary space of the distance between two people should maintain between each other during a process of communication. As the name suggests, it helps us to understand the proximity. That is the state of being close to a person according to the relationship. It is the study of physical space between individuals. Edward T. Hall, in a study of proximity, divides the space between people during an interaction into four zones, depending on the relationship people share with each other. First one is intimate. The intimate zone has the shortest distance between people. It only extends to 45 centimeters, that is approximately 1.5 feet. This space is shared by close family members like parents, spouses, and relatives. This space is also shared between very close friends and lovers. Number two is personal. The personal zone becomes 146 centimeter and ends at 120 centimeters, that is approximately 4 feet. According to Hall, this zone is shared between good friends, colleagues, classmates, and some other close acquaintances. This space indicates a certain level of familiarity between the people. Third one is social. This zone communication is mostly formal and official. It begins at 1.21 meter, that is till 4 feet, and it ends till 12 feet. In this zone, we interact with people in official capacity, newly formed schools or office groups, new acquaintances or strangers. Interacting with complete stranger to ask for direction or in an interview is an example of communication in this zone. Fourth one is the public. As the reading suggests, it is related to communication in a public sphere. It starts from 12 feet and moves on to 25 feet, or the range of eyesight or hearing, where we can listen or we can see a person. Classroom lectures, seminars, training sessions are some of the examples of formal events in this zone of communication. It is important to understand the proper zone of proximity. That is, to maintain proper distances during a process of communication, to establish strong personal and social relationships. Then we move on to chronomics. According to Thomas V. J. Greenwell, a scholar who studied nonverbal communication in detail, was first to use the term chronomics to explain the function of time in communicative process. In other words, we can understand it as the study of the use of time in human interactions. Time is a valuable resource, and how we use it in our daily transactions defines our behavioral patterns. If a person is late for an interview or sends late responses to the emails, then it is perceived that the person cannot use the time effectively and create a negative impression. If a person arrives too early for an interview, then it has may be perceived as over-eagerness for that purpose. Time can be monochromic or polychromic. Monochromic time style is it is a part of popular business structure where time is considered money. In this system, the work is divided in small segments for effective scheduling, arrangements, and master purposes. With this, we will be concluding today's session and we will be moving further in our next session.